Hi everyone, I am Xinyue. Today, Shiyu and I am going to introduce you guys about Indigenous children's culture, and we're gonna divide it into two parts: their cultural identity and education. And I am gonna talk about the first part, cultural identity. I separate them into three details. First of all is family and community. The second is cultural shock and cultural genocide. And finally is children and art, which I link it to the week 6 topic. Here's the part 1, family and community. Throughout the week's readings and course materials, we were able to appreciate language as a critical tool to help Indigenous children understand their history and also to communicate their culture. As mentioned in the course, language is one way we can learn about the diversities of people through history. Language is more than just a tool for communication, but language holds knowledge themselves. Language is not only a tool for communication, but it also contains knowledge, and oral culture is of the great value of verbal communication. Storytelling is also a form of communication. The diversity of story, the evaluation of each stage, helps Indigenous children to understand their history, their cultures, and also help them to establish a sense of their own identity. As the most important part of the cultural heritage, family and communities are the main place for Indigenous children to communicate, and having family and community support can help more Indigenous children learn about their history and culture. Participating in many cultural significant activities organized by their communities can also help more Indigenous children to understand and appreciate their identity. For example, the communities often organize daily activities to help these Indigenous children to help each other. Like the older children will take care of the younger children to give them a sense of responsibility, and one-on-one activities will be held to help the children grow up better and more independently. So, when Indigenous children are 3 to 4 years old, they are given a name ceremony, which helps them to have a stronger sense of belonging to their culture and identity. So, in this way, many Indigenous people and children will avoid the identity confusion that many other children experience as adolescents because they're supported by their family and community to understand their identity from the beginning. So, in addition to this, the skill that Indigenous family and community will want their children to learn is ability to experience a deep connection to the land, which is called a literacy of land. These skills helps children to better learn and respect life on the land by teaching them how to fish, how to grow vegetables. While many Indigenous children also need to learn how to prepare traditional food. This experimental approach to learning is what Indigenous family and community want their children to learn, a skill that will help them integrate better with their native culture and history. Here we come to the second part is about cultural shock and cultural genocide. So with the development of the time, diverse cultures have been slowly integrated into the country of Canada. As a country of immigrants, immigrants bring their own culture with them. So, is this cultural shock a good phenomenon for the local culture of Canada? Not exactly. Although Canada is an inclusive country that has integrated many cultures from other countries, and it is this diversity of the culture that has made Canada what is it. It is actually the equivalent of the major culture shock to native culture of Canada. This is not conducive to the development of local culture in the country, but rather narrow the space for it to be understood to a certain extent. In Canada, more families and communities choose to communicate with English, while only 0.5% of families speak the Indigenous language. And this scarcity of language combined with the impact of the other cultures can easily lead to cultural genocide. But in today's society, Indigenous culture is making more and more people aware that Canada's Indigenous culture needs to be protected. So, in modern time, however, Indigenous cultures has become less influential than it once was. Before European colonization, Canada had a rich diversity of cultural practice, and cultural genocides came as a result of the disease, war, and cultural destruction. Nowadays, the rise of decolonization has also helped more colonized people to achieve their sovereignty. One very concrete example of this is the residential school. The Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, as a decolonization strategist, examine the historical and current affairs of a residential school. It has corrected immoral treatment of over 150,000 Indigenous children in the past and has held government and religious institutions and other universities accountable. So, here is a practical example. So, at the former Mohawk Institution Residential School in Brantford, Canada, more than 150,000 children attended residential schools from 1800s to 1919 in some cases. Children from Indigenous families would be forced into residential school to assimilate into white Canadian society, a practice that amounts to cultural genocide, and this cruel treatment caused these Indigenous children to completely reject their original cultures and thus have to integrate into another society and culture. So, although Indigenous culture was threatened with extinction at the time, many art artifacts were preserved, such as baby carriage and handicraft, which not only served as part of cultural identity but also gave Indigenous children to help them perceive themselves. As mentioned in the lessons on children and art, children's art often represent the cultural identity of different times and religions, and it can also serve as a form of self-expression. So, this is why the indigenous families and communities are increasingly encourage more and more indigenous children to make and paint art that express their innermost through thought, not only to help these children recognize their own identity and remember their culture and history, but also to help them become more in target with their culture and to help perceive indigenous culture in the modern world. So, to sum up, Canada's native culture has always been in a state of need of protection. As a country of immigrants, Canada is faced with so many new cultures to absorb every day, and how to maintain a balance between indigenous and foreign culture while helping to sustain indigenous cultures. This type of activities can help indigenous children to better understand their cultural histories. It's also important for them to be aware of multiculturalism and how they can perceive and integrate into the current societies rather than avoiding the intersection of culture with culture. The cultural intersection here is not the same as culture shock, but rather the expectation of interminglings and understanding between Canadian culture and other cultures. Cultural identity for Indigenous children is based on the shared definition of identity. Who am I? How have I been shaped? The individual's perception of himself or herself from the families of origin to the community's school is constantly influenced and shaped by the external environment during the adolescence until it shaped in the middle age. In this process, the individual gradually integrates into the corresponding identity groups. It is also hoped that more Indigenous communities and families can help Indigenous children to integrate and shape their personalities and perceptions of local culture. Nowadays, the cultivations of cultural awareness for Indigenous children is more about helping them to gain an identity and strengthening their identity in Canada. The government should also promote the development of indigenous culture so that it can be given its rightful place and protected in Canada.
Hi everyone, this is Shiyu. So let's move on to the topic of education of Indigenous children. So firstly, I'm gonna discuss the knowledge of Indigenous children based on the reading this course, and then I will bridge in a topic to painting that is called Books of Life. After that, I will extend to a video clip that is called Climb Gardens Learning Together. So according to Ball's reading, identity and knowledge in Indigenous young children's experiences in Canada, we can see some activities, attitudes, and values are so much a part of young children's daily experiences. Accordingly, we can see the Indigenous children were learning experiential knowledge like cooking foods, in planting plants, and doing chores in their families. And the second one, protocols for speaking and listening, such as the rule of voice, topics, and conversational wait times, and the format for sharing a story based on what is important for the listener to know. Here we can see the Indigenous children were learning language by storytelling. So when they were learning this knowledge, no matter experiential lessons or language, they were also practicing their learning strategy in observations, listening, and participation in their communities. Now let's see the following quotations. As the First Nation elder explained, it is each family's responsibility to teach young children about their relations, including their ancestors who have passed on. And children learn their individual identity through one-to-one activities with older relatives who come to know the spirit of child. So we can see the Indigenous children have the deep acknowledgement in culture heritage, like who we are, where do we from, and which language do we speak, who is our ancestors, and so on. And they are taught to learn the culture heritage to their siblings, to their next generations. So in conclusion, the Indigenous children were learning ways of life, and they were learning experiential lessons based relationships with families, spirits, and nature. So these knowledges, the Indigenous people believe these knowledges were from their elder relatives, their elder generations. And the elder generations, Indigenous people believe this knowledge were from nature. They were from their ancestors. So, as you can see, there's a deep relationship between the Indigenous people and nature. And then I'll bring a topic to a painting that is called Books of Life. So the instruction said the most beautiful thing is nature. So it is painted by Letitia Monias, who was an Badminton Aboriginal kid. She used the appropriate markers and define each element of the painting in appropriate colors, like yellow shining suns, blue skies, green forests, dark blue lakes, gray roads, brown frames, and gray hills. Even we can see at the very far from away of the painting, there's a small house at the top of the hill. This is what does she think of the nature should look like. So she painting her inside of the nature. It's so gorgeous, isn't it? So according to CCY 3692, that is authority and representations of the artifact, we can see that Indigenous children learn ways of life from nature, just like the name. Nature is a nice book because it contains, go back to the reading again, it contains ways of life and many of the mysterious wisdoms. And beside, the forest should be the roots of Indigenous people, and relating to the reading again, it's about the culture heritage, like, and culture identity, like who they are, where do they come from, which language do they speak, and where do they live, and what's their life should look like. Also, on the perspective of a kid, especially for an Indigenous kid, they are showing wishes for nice and simple life. So, absolutely, she is demonstrating deep acknowledgement in nature, and she had a strong awareness of ecology and nature protection. So, as we can see, the Indigenous children were pretty aware of importance of nature as their native home. So when they grew up, most of the Indigenous people are good at leadership. So now I'm gonna show you a video that is called Klein Gardens Learning Together. So it demonstrating the leadership of Indigenous people in ecology. So the video is briefly talking about the Salish people. So the Salish adolescents and elders participate together. They're cooking foods, cooking seafood by a beach at the Gulf Island National Park. Their aims to protect sea gardens and keep it healthy. So the activities demonstrate importance of ecological and cultural landscape. If you watch carefully in this video, you can see there are many of the non-Indigenous people occur. So they were curious about what was their life of Salish people. So they were learning about their customs, as well as the Salish kids. They were also learning about how did the Salish elders people cooked food, lived when these elders were the kids. So I post a video clip here, and it's pretty nice short film. And the significance here is hoping the Indigenous people can also show the respect to the nature and showing the equality between the Indigenous nation and non-Indigenous nations. So as you can, if you see the video, you can see everybody here is having fun, enjoying in this kind of activities. So if you are interested in it, go and watch it. Well, so here's the references for the entire presentations. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.
Well, when we talk about clam harvesting, it's been important to our people for thousands of years. And I really believe that it is one of the unique attractions to the coastline for Salish people. That, all year round, you have a very valuable source of protein right at your front door.
Years ago in 1960s, my mother-in-law used to dig the clams, and while we were digging, she was boiling the clams on the beach and getting that all prepared. She had a great big tub on the fire, open fire, cooking it while we were digging. It was a long day's work, 2 days work with the ironwood and the cedar root. And stepping on it was that was the fun part, is having to step on the clams, not knowing if we were heavy enough to press it.
A lot of our elders aren't going to be around for too long to teach us. I find it actually very important to bring the young youth and get them involved, because a lot of our tradition has been lost, and it's actually all new to me as well.
This is something that was a staple for our people there for many, many, many moons, and life in the ocean was our means where we were able to sustain ourselves by the ocean. We were able to also utilize all of the things in the forest, and with all of these things that we have, we've got the stories, and all of the stories that we've had morals.
Through this project, we're able to bring First Nations youth, bring elders to sites of traditional importance, historical importance to them, and reinvigorate that ecological and cultural landscape. So for parks, it really is about partnership, about knowledge, and combining ecology and culture, which are two prominent mandates of Parks Canada Agency.
After all these
generations of denying that we had agriculture and that we had this sustainability, we've actually started to meet and have the evidence that we had all these systems in place pre-contact, and to have a large agency like Parks Canada designing a program, bringing Western science and traditional science together to discuss that. It's the beginning of a giant unifying discussion that should have happened hundreds of years ago, and I'm really happy that it's actually happening now and that I'm able to be a part of it.